Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. We begin tonight with breaking news. Just in the last hour or so, Donald Trump issuing 20 pardons and commutations ahead of leaving office, including 2 people convicted in the Russia investigations that were pursued by Robert Mueller, attorney Alex van der Zwaan, a fairly minor character who was convicted of lying to federal investigators in that Mueller investigation, and George Papadopoulos, who was a foreign policy advisor to Trump's campaign in 2016 and who pled guilty to the very same charge. The New York Times reports that Trump's pardon list also includes 4 former U.S. service members who were convicted of killing Iraqi civilians while working as contractors in 2007. One of them, Nicholas Slatton, had been sentenced to life in prison after the Justice Department had gone to great lengths to prosecute him. He was sentenced for his role in the killing of 17 Iraqi civilians. If you don't remember, the Nisour Square massacre was a bunch of Blackwater contractors opening fire on civilians who were stuck in traffic in midday Baghdad. Max Fisher, the Times, reporting that one of the Blackwater contractors continued shooting civilians in the crowd, even as his colleagues shouted over and over for ceasefire. One had to pull a gun on him to force him to stop. One of the people he shot was a mother clutching her infant. Trump also pardoning 3 Republican former Congressmen, Duncan Hunter of California, a staunch ally who was sentenced to 11 months in prison for stealing lots and lots of campaign funds. Also, Chris Collins of New York, the first member of Congress to endorse Trump in the 2016 election, who pled guilty to conspiracy to commit securities fraud and lying to law enforcement officials, as well as hardline conservative Steve Stockman of Texas, who was sentenced to 10 years in federal prison for 23 felonies, including fraud. Trump had already pardoned or commuted the sentence of key allies, including Michael Flynn and Roger Stone. And this latest round of pardons is not expected to be his last before he leaves office in 29 days. Cynthia Alexny served as a federal prosecutor and as an assistant U.S. attorney in Washington, D.C. Paul Butler served as a federal prosecutor in the Justice Department's Public Corruption Division, and they both join me now. Paul, let me start with you. There's 2 things I think of here. One, the public corruption aspect of this. I mean, there are a number of politicians now of his own party that he has pardoned, including these 3 Republican members of Congress. That is, what message does that send? What do you think of that as a use of the pardon power?
This is a cynical move by Trump. He's laying the groundwork for his certainly to come pardons of his family members and possibly close associates like Rudy Giuliani. And so this was strategic. There are certainly some people who he pardoned who deserve clemency, including people who received draconian sentences for drug crimes and have turned their lives around. And then there are people like George Papadopoulos and others who protected or tried to protect President Trump during the Russian investigation. And this is their reward with, as you say, many more rewards to come.
Yeah, Cynthia, that aspect of it, the category of people who have now been pardoned, who were either pled or convicted of lying ostensibly on behalf of the president, lying in furtherance of protecting him, in furtherance of the enterprise around him. I don't think there's a ton of precedent for a president doing that.
There's not a ton of precedent, but there's precedent in the criminal world. I mean, this is essentially a criminal enterprise. And he's slowly pardoning everybody in an attempt to erase the actual history. I mean, we have Stone, we have Flynn, and soon we'll have everybody else. Now we have van der Zwaan and Papadopoulos. He's, Friday night, Christmas night, expect Christmas cards to be flying and more pardons to come. I mean, he basically is pardoning everybody in the Mueller probe to try to erase that, a bunch of murderers and political hacks. And then there's a couple people he throws in to kind of try to hide it all and make it look like it's a proper use of the pardon power. But he runs a criminal enterprise and he's using his power to cover it up. And there's no way to stop him until January 20th.
Yeah, Paul, the pardoning of the Blackwater contractors, Nisour Square was a horrific scene. Incredibly, profoundly traumatic in Iraq. The Justice Department did go to extraordinary lengths, multiple trials, if I'm not mistaken, if I'm recalling those details correctly. a scene of mayhem and bloodshed visited upon unsuspecting civilians for no reason, just going about their day. And while those folks are getting pardons, the same administration is rushing ahead with an unprecedented spree of executions before they hit the deadline that they have to leave office. The juxtaposition of that is a little hard to swallow, I got to say.
Chris, more people have been executed by the federal government in the last 6 months than in the last 30 years. Barr and Trump are on a killing spree. There's no other way to put it. And when you compare the people who've been executed with the people who Trump pardoned today, it's grotesque. So recently, Karla Faye Tucker was executed. She was a survivor of sex trafficking and gang rape, the first woman to be executed by the federal government in decades. But we can think about Brandon Bernard, who was executed recently. He was 18 at the time of his crime. To show you how arbitrary the death penalty is, he was implicated along with 4 other people who were convicted of the same involvement in the crime. And some of those people are out now. They've been sentenced and released. So there's just no precedent for this in terms of what other presidents have done with regard to the death penalty. Certainly other presidents have used the pardon power in an instrumental and cynical way. But when you juxtapose the killing spree that Barr and Trump have embarked on with the folks who don't deserve any kind of mercy because they sold out the United States, it's really grotesque is, again, the word that comes to mind.